Rigdon. Well, first of all, today there are too few of those who have the sincere desire to serve God instead of their pridefulness, by taking care of the human souls without getting remuneration for it at that. In fact, such people are indeed few among the millions who serve in the army of priests of different religions. The overwhelming majority of those who serve in religions are outsiders who have been tempted by material aims and not by spiritual salvation. And secondly, no external changes will stop the internal spiritual process for the true God's people. Even after changing their profession and working like everyone else for the benefit of society, they will continue to develop themselves spiritually just as sincerely, devoting their free time to helping others. For this is their spiritual need, their internal life, which prevails over circumstances of this world. So external changes will not stop them, rather they will delight them, given what they have to face and see in the everyday interior life of a religious community, as well as in the actions and deeds of their colleagues. One of the necessary conditions for achieving a qualitative transformation of society is the understanding by people themselves the meaning of their spiritual development, as well as the cessation of participation in tempting with power and material values of the people who belong to the army of priesthood. Do not give them money, donations, or presents of any kind. Do not appease their pridefulness with bowing, worshipping, hand-kissing, servility, obedience, supplications, or similar temptations for their animal nature. In other words, you must not sin yourself and provoke others into it. After all, this person is just like you. He, a servant of the sacrifice cult, does not differ from an ordinary person in any way, since his soul is also located in the body, in this material world. Here, no one can be either lower or higher, for all human souls suffer equally from this material captivity. A human being has only one way out of these material pincers: to develop spiritually and liberate his soul, leave for the world of God. There are no such people who have not at least once felt this need coming from their soul and manifesting in aspiration for true spiritual freedom. It is a different matter that a person's animal nature interprets this need of the soul in its own way, distorting the very concept of freedom, endowing it with material quality which is alien to spiritual nature. All people are believers. Only each person uses the power of his faith as he chooses. By the way, those who consider themselves to be quite ardent atheists are actually, when they're alone, prone to the same fears and superstitions as any believer. In society, these people are basically those same priests, only on a small scale, the only difference being they openly glorify qualities of the animal nature, their self-love, pridefulness, vanity, and so on. Anastasia. Once the institution of the priesthood is abolished in society, how can people avoid similar mistakes in the future? I mean, while disseminating spiritual knowledge, how not to be tempted by pridefulness or vanity, how not to desire power over your own kind, that is, how to resist temptations of the animal nature. Rigdon. If the civilization moves in the spiritual direction, it will be possible to solve this issue quite easily. It must be understood that a human being has a dual nature, and constant swings between the animal and the spiritual nature take place in him. Consequently, it must be done in such a way that spiritual cognition and dissemination of universal humanitarian primordial knowledge is not to the advantage of a person's animal nature as a conductor of the animal mind, representing the material world and its interests, but so that it is absolutely acceptable and favorable for development of the spiritual nature in a person as a conductor of the spiritual world. It is important to make the primordial spiritual knowledge accessible to all people, and while disseminating it, eliminate any possibility of tempting people with incentives of the animal nature. Anastasia. So it is necessary for people themselves to create such conditions in society in which for those who spiritually educate others, it would be materially disadvantageous. Rigdon. Yes, in this matter, it is necessary to eliminate any possibilities of manipulation of public consciousness by conductors of the animal mind, as well as any chance of someone deriving economic profit or political benefit. Furthermore, it is necessary to prevent distortion of information and manipulation of it to someone's advantage. That is, this kind of manifestation of discretionary power in the field of knowledge dissemination. Anastasia. However, this will truly be possible only when many people learn the basics of the primordial knowledge. And when the world community has this information, the majority of people will begin to accurately separate the spiritual wheat from the chaff, and they will not succumb to the influence and provocations of people with bad intentions. They will be able to ignore manifestations of the animal nature within themselves and uphold the spiritual nature in their community and the environment. Rigdon. Absolutely. First of all, people should awaken spiritually, and then these vestiges of colonial thinking will fall off on their own in society, and a whole army of various parasites and their freeloaders who live at the expense of people's faith will be cast out of the spiritual field. For as long as they live off ordinary people, they will come up with any number of things just to live their lives as social parasites, freeloaders in society, and so that on top of it, people kiss their hands for that and hold them in high esteem. People must learn to be the masters of their own spiritual destiny and not to expect someone to do their vital spiritual work for them. They must independently perfect themselves, work on themselves, and broaden their horizons of cognition of the world. Not to expect mercy from priests and politicians, not to indulge in illusions, and not to allow themselves to be manipulated. It is necessary to be a more mature personality, a socially active and spiritually responsible human being. And in order not to repeat the mistakes of the past and to avoid the dependence on the will of the animal mind in the future, as well as distortions of spiritual knowledge and return to the priestly schemes, it is necessary that those who decided to help themselves and other people in spiritual matters did that to the detriment of their pridefulness and material interests. Because, as I have already said, where financial interest appears, or the possibility to satisfy one's pridefulness, get any kind of benefit, or gain privileges and power over someone, sooner or later temptation will arise and weakness of the human spirit will manifest itself. How does this look in real life? If a person independently improves himself, has a spiritual experience, and an inner need to disseminate spiritual knowledge, he helps people in his spare time. They learn, and in their turn, they also help other people in these matters, and those help the next ones. But everyone should work for the benefit of society, have some sort of civilian occupation, earning their daily bread with their work. In their spare time, people must study and share experience and knowledge with others as equals, like with good friends, suppressing their animal nature and guided by the spiritual nature in their actions. This is a real help to people, and at the same time, work on yourself. Detection of manifestations in yourself of the spiritual and animal natures, effective control over one's thoughts, studying one's nature and spiritual development. That is the point. You yourself grow and help others. Do you understand what is so special about disseminating spiritual knowledge in this way? A person goes to share the knowledge about God with people and spends his own time, his effort, and resources without getting anything material in return, no temptations or gratification of his animal nature. The only thing that he gets is spiritual augmentation while communicating dispassionately with souls of the people who are suffering just like him. What you sow in yourself is what you will eventually reap. Spiritual to spiritual and material to the material. That is, this person sacrifices his earthly selfhood in the form of ambitions of his animal nature on the spiritual altar of his life, and also multiplies his spiritual gifts as a result of communication with people. These gifts are not material, not money, food, things, or human ambitions from pridefulness. This is exactly that spiritual component which a person passes to other people through the spiritual knowledge. For by disseminating spiritual knowledge, a person thus resists the unified animal mind and helps others, at least a little bit, to know, feel, and understand the divine essence that is hidden in them and that does not belong to the material world. Matter is mortal, but the soul is immortal. Personality has freedom of choice, whether to become mortal or to live for eternity. This is the whole point, and everything must grow from here. One must remember that the animal mind is very strong, and a human being, by virtue of his dual nature, and because of the swings in his choice between the two natures, is weak. Even those who are steadfastly walking along the spiritual path are exposed to attacks of the animal nature. Should a person get just a little distracted or become slightly tempted by the material, as the animal mind seizes his consciousness at once, often winning during those moments of his life when the personality's choice is particularly important. This is why it is recommended to be vigilant, to work on yourself relentlessly, and not give an inch to your animal nature. If you have stepped on a rake once, know how to avoid it next time. While disseminating spiritual knowledge, there is always a temptation from the animal nature by pridefulness, likening oneself to a superior being, in the desire to appropriate this knowledge and interpret it in one's own way from one's mind while talking to other people. This is how the distortion of it from the animal nature usually happens, as well as substitution with material concepts, and as a result, the primordial knowledge is lost. A person must understand that spiritual knowledge is given to all people. The human being is not God or an angel or a cherub, and nor is he the Holy Spirit. He is just a human, the same as all people, since his soul is confined to a multidimensional energy structure that belongs to the material world. Anastasia. There is another important question which interests our readers. Can a person give somebody an absolution of his or her sins, forgive anything to anyone in the spiritual sense, on behalf of superior spiritual beings? Rigdon. A human cannot absolve anyone of sins or pray for anyone, for he himself is imperfect. And no one on earth is given the power to forgive on behalf of superior spiritual beings, and even more so on behalf of God. Absolution of sin is associated with confession, which we have already mentioned in our conversation. It is necessary to understand the psychological nature of the origin of such a phenomenon in religion as confession. The effect of catharsis, from the Greek word katharsis, meaning purification, is well known not only to ministers of various religions, but also to psychoanalysts and psychotherapists. People knew about it also in ancient times. This is a therapeutic method when a person recalls moving moments of their life which gave rise to a deep experience of an inner conflict or a psychoneurotic disorder. In fact, for a person, this is a psychological relief, which is inherent in any heart-to-heart conversation, for example with a friend, about one's troubles or problems, after which his state of depression disappears, and a person experiences a kind of a psychological relief. As they say, joy shared is joy doubled, while sorrow shared is sorrow halved. And in most cases, the more pridefulness there is in a person, the harder it is for him or her to confess any wrongdoing. Religion's ministers added this practice to their armory. Confessing an offense was presented as a kind of a sacrifice which was certain to be followed by a reward, forgiveness of wrongful actions, or the remission of sins. This way, they basically dishabituated people from working on themselves spiritually and accustomed them to the thought that if a person asked sincerely enough, they were sure to receive this forgiveness. I repeat, this is simply a purely psychological technique which is based on the person's faith. But here's what I want to say in this respect. A heart-to-heart conversation is certainly good. However, it only temporarily helps a person experience one of the consequences of his inner conflict at that particular moment, yet it does not solve the main thing, removing the cause of the conflict. The roots of the latter lie in the daily habit of thinking, which is mostly related to the concentration of the personality's attention on thoughts and desires of the animal nature. Only the person himself can radically eliminate the cause of such conflict's origin in himself. No one else can do this for him. Only he himself, with his choice and internal changes, by multiplying his good deeds and seriously working on himself, can spiritually purify himself, evolve, and as a mature being, escape from the material captivity, free his soul. Only he himself, thanks to his spiritual work, can on his own leave for the seventh dimension, the seventh heaven, paradise, nirvana, that is, make his spiritual way into the world of God. Any person who truly walks along the spiritual path, who works on himself, and whose life is dominated by his personal, innermost communion with God, love, and connection with the spiritual nature, sooner or later reaches this understanding on his own. People should learn to understand their dual nature, understand and forgive each other's mistakes in such a way as if they themselves were learning this lesson, and as if this were happening exactly to them. To err is human. However, spiritually strong people not only acknowledge their mistakes, but they can also learn from them. They have the courage and patience to realize the mistakes made and fix them if possible. One should not be unhappy about what cannot be repaired, but you should double your efforts in what will unfailingly bring spiritual joy not only to you, but to other people as well. Life is a real school where mistakes are lessons and the gained experience a mentor. As they say, a smooth sea does not make a skilled sailor. Once he gains wisdom, thanks to the spiritual experience, the person begins to steer his ship confidently and purposefully in the midst of a raging ocean of life, avoiding mistakes of the past, not allowing the elements of the past to toss him from side to side, causing inner conflicts. As sages of the ancient times said, holding life's steering wheel in the raging ocean of life requires, first of all, spiritual work on oneself. For such a brave person who steers his ship through the storm of life's elements, sooner or later a day will come when a completely different, spiritual, pure world, which he has not previously known within himself, will open to his inner eye. This world begets peace in the soul and allows wisdom to emerge victorious out of the elements of matter and moor on the shore of eternity. Anastasia. Indeed, One must not give cause, first of all, to oneself for the emergence and strengthening in consciousness of thoughts about different material temptations, and that's a fact. I think that many people would like to live and create in a society where those who walk side by side through life do not trample one another into the mud of egoistic ambitions, negative emotions, and other manifestations of the animal nature, but instead stimulate good in society and treat each other with understanding and respect. Judging by the history of mankind, people have dreamt about it for a long time. Rigdon: quite true. So when the spiritual matters of society are taken care of by society itself, and this becomes natural and a priority in it, then there will be order. And for this, it is necessary to create such conditions that the majority of people in this civilization live for spiritual purposes and not for material priorities like today. This is when all the priestly structures will disappear by themselves, because the structure of secret power over people, which remains at the expense of concealment of true spiritual knowledge, will cease to exist. People will know about the truth, and it will be available to everyone. Anastasia: yes, qualitative changes in society require a change of mindset of the people themselves who make up this society. All this assumes an innovative way of thinking as well as an innovative culture and behavior, which are moreover introduced at the initiative of society itself. Although, in fact, everything new is a well-forgotten old. People have long dreamt of creating an ideal equitable society where freedom and equality would reign. But priests and politicians use this desire of the people's, including it into their promises, but in reality, doing everything to prevent this from happening. So this equality actually has always been a formality, even after priests and politicians provoked favorable to them social upheavals, reforms, and revolutions, as well as changes of one religion, party, or social order for another. It is easy to notice that the outcome of such disturbances is always the same. Priests and politicians once again create a management hierarchy, the elite with privileges. That is, the situation in society does not actually change. In fact, only the advertising sign, the name of a social system, or a dominant religion changes. Perhaps this happens because people have long forgotten what true equality and freedom are. Rigdon: people look at treetops, but they do not see the roots. And the bottom line is this: all people are equal, and first of all, when it comes to the conditions of imprisonment in this material world, in the characteristics of their spiritual and animal natures, the transience of their lives, and the temporariness of their stay in this world. All people are born and die alone, and all have their own spiritual destiny, which they themselves form with their own choice. All people are kind by their spiritual nature, because everyone has a soul, and in this sense, everyone is kindred and very affine to each other, for souls are united, they are from the world of God. And this unites all people, regardless of social status, place of residence, religious beliefs, and nationality of their bodies. After all, it is not the people's, new personalities' fault that they got a particular body with certain genetic inheritance of one or another race, or the fact that they were born Chinese, Englishmen, Nigerians, and so on. That is, that their biological material shell has been reproduced in this or that ethnic group. But note that despite certain physiological differences, people, regardless of belonging to one or another race, assess themselves and other people, both familiar and unfamiliar to them, by the degree of humaneness. All the nations have concepts of good and evil. This assessment exists on the battlefield of their consciousness, based on the choice between the spiritual and the animal natures. And the main thing for people is not what their friend's body looks like, but what the person is like on the inside, what his spiritual beauty is. A body is a body. What the majority of people have really learned about their bodies can be summed up by the phrase, "something hurts here." The beauty ideals of the body in human society are relative, and they're conditioned by advertising of some people and imitation of others. Moreover, different peoples have their own ideas about beauty of the body. Some people consider it beautiful to lengthen their necks with rings from childhood, while others prefer to have teenage shape. But this is not the point. It is not the fault of people's souls that they have been crammed into these or those bodies. The personality's body, just like all the external conditions of its existence, is a consequence of the chosen priorities, dominant desires, and the choice that was once made by the subpersonalities of the current person. Who divides people so intensely today, splitting the single whole, mankind, into parts, races, ethnic and various social and religious groups, politicians and priests? They determine the direction of development of science in various areas, create conditions for people to be involved in expanding and deepening of certain topics, and consequently integrating them into the educational system of the younger generation. For example, who studies nations and nationalism? Political scientists. They obtain academic degrees and various rewards for this research and for the development of their different speculative concepts in the general direction assigned to them according to political orders. So they dig in all directions, inventing different theories, for all of them want to live well and have a decent salary, honor, and respect. For their personal power, global politicians divide nations, and they do this with people's own hands. For example, representatives of science, consciously or without understanding the global essence, carry out for payment the programs and directives of politicians, thus implementing their political decisions and actually promoting in society the perspectives that are beneficial to those in power. Moreover, they base all these theories on numerous historical facts, under the plausible pretext of historical knowledge, demonstrating destructive models of the past, supposedly under the slogans of public censure, as in, "you must not do that." But in fact, this is a demonstration and imposing on people models of stereotypical behavior and options of how else it can be done, which contribute to even greater division, that is, society's differentiation. For instance, they describe the ideas of class struggle, inequality, racial discrimination, social injustice, division of people into superior and inferior, into the elite and the flock, ways to start wars, and so on. Take any political science textbook of any country of the world. This is a sheer aggravation of xenophobia, from the Greek xenos, meaning alien, and phobos, meaning fear, that is, of rejection, fear and hatred towards each other, intolerance of anything foreign or unfamiliar, and thus subconsciously adversarial to a person. But no textbook will say how things really are at the highest levels of power, what today's politicians and priests actually build their power upon, and how they exploit entire nations in their profit-making interests. So division and fragmentation of society are stimulated by world politicians and priests artificially. What for? To create in people's consciousness an image of the enemy and keep the whole society in fear and obedience with this image. So that under this pretext aimed at fighting someone, society would, without thinking, approved the allocation of large funds from the state budget of their country to tighten security measures and for other similar expenses. In other words, the state would thus strengthen its control and power over people. And who represents the state? Groups of politicians, that is, individuals with their own interests. They use this artificially created public fear, which at times is sponsored by them, in order to strengthen their power and simply to plunder the budget under the pretext of secrecy and ensuring the security of the population. Suffice it to look at what is shown to people on television. There is continuous intimidation about how everything in their country is bad: murders, explosions, robberies, scandals, victims of natural disasters, in other words, constant emergencies and incidents. How can a normal psyche endure all this? And why is this all shown? Isn't there any good news in the world? There is, only it is not shown much on purpose, for they voice that which is deeply repugnant to the spiritual nature of a human, but which strongly activates his animal nature instead. Politicians and priests actually benefit from a person being like a hunted animal, so that he is dominated by animal fear for his life, and for the masses by animal servility and aggression towards an artificially created image of an enemy. Then power over such zombified people becomes unlimited. So society has an inevitable result. While the majority of people wish for equality, freedom, and justice, in the global society, politicians and priests actually stimulate constant wars and incitement of racial, national, and religious hatred among people. Anastasia. Yes, sheer deception. This is equivalent to giving shovels to people so that they dig graves for themselves with their own hands, thinking that they're digging a foundation for a new house for their multinational family. Wherever you look, there's factitious, artificial division and fragmentation of humanity. But all this deception can exist only until people change the situation themselves. Rigdon. Quite right. Everything is in people's hands, or rather in the way of their thinking. There is one truth, but if the person allows a small difference in it with his mind, the truth eventually becomes infinitely divided emptiness in him. To know the truth does not mean to divide everything in it with the mind, pro or con. To know the truth means to comprehend with the soul its single essence and the infinity of spiritual freedom. From the spiritual nature stems the natural human need to live in equality, brotherhood, unity with the entire humanity, and the realization that all the people on the planet are kindred and very affine to each other in their spiritual component. When the animal nature dominates in a person, it distorts this need, and then the person begins to compare himself with others in the consumerist format of thinking, believing himself to be equal to those who, in his opinion, are higher than him in some way, and not even remembering about those who are in some way lower than him. And politicians and priests use this with great success by including similar ideas about equality and brotherhood in their slogans, religious writings, political concepts, and laws on pieces of paper. Anastasia. Well, yes, and then people wonder how it happens when all seem to be brothers and sisters, and constitutions and international conventions talk about the international humanitarian law, about the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, about equality of all people, and so on. That is, they're written with care for people and their rights based on the principle of parity. But in fact, we live in the world of opportunities that are far from equal for all. Rigdon. People are divided by matter and its needs, that is, by the animal nature. But if people are guided by their spiritual nature, then collectively they will be able to overcome any differences among themselves. Perhaps I will share an ancient Eastern parable about two brothers, which tells a story about the human choice and its consequences. Once, long ago, in one settlement, two twin brothers came into the world. Although they were born within minutes of each other, for the rest of his life, the firstborn considered himself the elder and therefore smarter. When the brothers grew up, it so happened that one traveler stopped for a night in their house. He turned out to be a spiritual and a wise person. At that time, the people of this settlement were at war with neighboring people. This war brought a lot of grief to the people, but nobody knew how to avoid the war and death. And the brothers asked the wise man for advice. The spiritual man, after listening to them, told them simple truths about the essence of life and death. He told them what happens in the world of people, about the nature of humans' duality, what keeps him in the chains of ignorance, and how to break free from them. He spoke about how to find the true path, save one's soul, and come to that which lies beyond life and death. In the end, he said, it is only possible to become free from death when one knows the truth. The truth is a domain of the inner. The path to the truth is a domain of the outer. And only having walked this path will you know the truth and become free from death. But each of the brothers understood the words of the wise man in his own way, and each chose his own path to save his soul. The elder brother decided to perfect himself in spiritual knowledge. He left his native land to avoid participating in the war, visited many countries where he studied religions of the local peoples, and chose from them what he considered to be the best, that which would lead him to attaining the property of the inner. Eventually, he gained most diverse knowledge and experience, and so succeeded in his endeavors that he considered himself an enlightened man endowed by the good will of the chosen one. Moreover, he himself believed it to such an extent that many people believed him and began to learn from him. The younger brother went to the people and began to tell them the simple truths he had heard from the wise man. Some people listened to his words. Others laughed, thinking that everything in this world is decided by rulers who listen to the god's advice. But soon, even those who laughed at him began to listen to the young man's speeches because his words were honest. There was truth in them. And people told him that they did not want the war, they did not want to kill anyone, and did not want to die themselves. But what were they to do? For they were forced to fight by their rulers. To which the young man replied, if rulers can destroy but cannot create, what is their merit? If they cannot resurrect the dead, how can they condemn the living to death? Any person can cut off a branch from a tree, but only a master can attach it to the tree, and the ruler is only human. He is also afraid of death, just like any of you, so he is hiding behind the lives of his warriors, issuing decrees. But his decrees are executed by you. The ruler is one, while you are many. He deceives you, saying that he is strong, for his power is you, doing his will against yours. If people lay down their arms, there will be no one to fight. The power of a mountain is not in the stone lying on its top, but in its monolithic nature. And the people were inspired by that wisdom and shared it with the neighboring people with whom they were at war. The truth was heard, and everyone laid down their weapons. So in that place, thanks to the ordinary young man who had shared the true word of the wise man with the people, the war stopped and peace came. And many lives were saved by the truth, and many found the path to it. But time passes quickly. Gone were the earthly years of brothers. As they were born on the same day, so they died. Thanks to tireless zeal, the elder brother reached such heights in his spiritual perfection that he could appear before the guardian himself, behind whom towered the Chinvat bridge. And he was allowed to behold with his own eyes his younger brother cross this bridge, and the gatekeeper thrust open before him the gate of eternity. And the highly spiritual elder brother was so amazed by what he had seen that all his subsequent 9 reincarnations he firmly followed the spiritual path of the younger brother, keeping the memory of what he saw and telling people about it. Anastasia. Yes, this is a very good parable, educational. It's true, for many people, the spiritual remains at the level of high self-opinion instead of real work on oneself. Mind you, just like in society as a whole, everything is laid out fine on paper, but in reality, it's one long ordeal. Rigdon. Actually, it is people who choose how to live, from every individual to a group, from a small to a large community. The world politicians and priests convince people that it is them, as administrative personnel, who are the unifying force, and that without them, nations will do nothing. They instill this and divide people constantly. Otherwise, people would start to act without them, moreover, together. For everything depends on people. They're the ones who implement the plans of priests and politicians, doing real work and carrying out different programs in society. There can be no politician or priest unless people themselves support him. As soon as a politician or a priest is deprived of such support, he loses authority and power, everyone forgets about him, and he becomes an ordinary member of society, just like everyone else.